Hello everybody and welcome to another board game discussion video. Today's topic is all about board games as collectible items. So this is a fairly unique thing that I've kind of touched on a little bit over the course of the past few years. I've talked about my philosophy of collecting and why I have and keep certain games. I've talked about my personal collection, and I've showed you a lot of the games that I do have and things of that nature. And of course I've talked about collectible card games like Magic the Gathering, where I really just don't get the appeal personally. Nothing against those of you who do love it, but I personally just don't understand it. And so today what I wanted to do is really talk about three major things when it comes to board games. First off, board games as collector's items and as investments. Is it possible? Are they out there? Second thing, how do you know if something is collectible or an investment when it comes to board games? And third, is it worth it? So first and foremost, can you make money buying and selling board games and doing all of this kind of stuff? The answer is yes. Technically you can. You can get some wonderful thrift store finds that are super cheap, and it turns out to be a highly valued game or a sought after game. And so that means that you can sell it for a decent profit, and that's great. There's a lot of people who will go to like large scale auctions and stuff like that. Like for example, if an unfortunate local game store shuts down and they sell off all of their inventory, they'll normally sell it off very, very cheaply. And so you can get a massive bulk buy and then sell it off even at retail price and make a little bit of money off of it. And so that's great, right? But that brings us to what makes a game valuable. What is it about a game that makes it valuable? And in general, the answer to that is scarcity. If there are fewer copies of a game out there, it means that it's going to be more valuable. Now, we're not talking necessarily about collector's editions, because collector's editions, very similarly to video game collector's editions, are generally kept and held by people so intensely that they never will see the light of day. But that said, they very well could, and you would pay out the nose in order to get them. A great example of this is the 3D Catan chest that came out as part of the anniversary special, worth a lot of money today. And another major category that we have for board games is out of print games. This is probably the biggest category in general of how you can find games that are at least reasonably valuable. So as a couple of examples of this, I've got right here Shadows over Camelot. This is a game that comes to us from Days of Wonder, and the fact is, I don't know why this is out of print. It really shouldn't be. It's a great game. People absolutely love it. It's a wonderful cooperative game, and if you have the expansion for it, the Trials of Merlin or the Path of Merlin or something along those lines, then the price for the coupled set absolutely skyrockets. It's really ridiculous. It's pretty intense. And that's part of the thing too, is that expansions especially tend to be very, very pricey. That happens a lot. So another good example of that is Twilight Imperium 3rd edition, which I have up there. And I happen to have both of the expansions, or was it 3 expansions? I have all of the expansions for Twilight Imperium, the 3rd edition. Of course, now we have 4th edition, but we'll get to that later. And another great example for this is Battlestar Galactica. Again, a game that is out of print, and because the IP has expired. But this game, it's an incredible co-op game. It's wonderfully fun, and it is worth a lot of money. Well, not a lot, but it's worth a decent amount if you've got it. And of course, condition always matters. It has to be in good condition. You got it new in box, unsealed, all of that kind of stuff. You can get a good amount of money for it. And the expansions, the expansions. Incidentally, if any of you have the Pegasus expansion, feel free to send it to me, because that's worthless. So yeah, just don't worry about that. Pegasus, whatever. You don't need that in your collection. But this is a unique case because it is not able to ever be reprinted, and so that means that it's theoretically at least, only going to get more and more and more valuable. I already mentioned expansions, and a good example for that is my Cosmic Encounter collection. The first edition of Cosmic Encounter, the Eon edition, the base games are actually relatively cheap. You can get them pretty easily, but the expansions for them are hugely expensive. They came in just little baggies, and so they're very difficult to find and very difficult to get. And so that is really where you start paying through the nose for a lot of this kind of stuff. But again, that's typically what's going to be a valuable game, is anything that's no longer made for whatever reason. A lot of times expansions will be worth more than other types of games, but there are a lot of base games that do have some value to them. But the fact is that it also has to be a desired thing by the community. The community has to care about the game in order to make it valuable. That's really the critical thing. If the community doesn't care, it's not worth it. Just because something is old doesn't make it valuable. But in the case of board games, generally older games are worth more. That said, if you have a random Monopoly from the 90s, it's not worth much, if anything. Nobody wants it. Just go get a new Monopoly. Which brings us right to, is it worth it to actually consider board games as investments and as kind of futures for, am I going to be able to sell this and get a good profit off of it? Well, the fact is that it really depends. And in the end, it doesn't depend, and the answer is no. So that's kind of what sucks. Really, the biggest way that you can make money with games right now is, as I mentioned, buying lots of games that come from closed down stores or things like that, or going to thrift shops and being able to find that gem and stuff like that. The very rare cases that you will really never run into. Another option that a lot of people opt for is when Kickstarters come, especially with larger Kickstarters that come from like Cool Mini or not. A lot of people will buy 4, 5, 6 copies of the game, where they will keep one for themselves to actually play, have one for themselves that they keep new and shrink, and then the other ones they'll sell off at a profit because they know it's never going to come to retail. And that's a great way that you can pretty regularly and knowingly make money, is go to these well-known companies that do good Kickstarters and buy the games that they make and buy multiple copies so that you can sell them new and shrink. And at the very least, you'll get your money back, pretty much guaranteed, but more than likely you can get a little bit extra on top of it, especially with stuff from Cool Mini or not. Those go for ridiculous amounts of money nowadays. But getting back to it, what about so-called normal games? So the problem is that I have to kind of paraphrase Tom Vassell in this case, which is, if a game is good enough, it will get reprinted. And that's true. Twilight Imperium 3rd edition, worth a huge amount of money, especially if you had the expansions, the Shards of the Throne, and the other one that I can't remember off the top of my head. But then we now have Twilight Imperium 4th edition. So just play that. Frankly, it's better in every single way. The only reason to have Twilight Imperium 3rd edition is because you want to have 3rd edition. The only reason that I have a whole bunch of Cosmic Encounter games is because it's literally my favorite game of all time, and it's been around for decades. And so I'm trying to get as many unique copies of the game as I can, because it's just something that I want to do. But the fact is that realistically, the actual monetary value is not that much. And on top of that, you can have some major issues that throw wrenches into all of this. A perfect example of this is this particular game, Dune. So this is the original release of Dune that came to us from Avalon Hill back when the Dune books were initially released, or just after they released and the first movie came out. And the thing is that this game was out of print for a very, very, very long time. But the thing is, it was exceedingly valuable. You could get a lot of money for this game because everybody wanted it. Of course, you could also just buy Rex from Fantasy Flight, which was very similar. but it's not Dune. It's not the same. But then something happened very recently. A new movie came out, and with new movie comes new game. This is the redone version of this game. It's a new edition, in this case from Gale Force 9, the same people who made the original game, and incidentally the same people who made Cosmic Encounter. So yeah, absolutely love it, right? But now we've got Dune, we've got Dune Imperium, we've got Dune this, Dune that, Dune the other, Dune the everything, right? It's insane, right? There's so much Dune games out there now that it's absolutely ridiculous. And the fact is that this Dune game and the other Dune game are pretty much the same. And so that means that the original doesn't really retain the value it has as a game, but as a collectible, maybe sort of kind of, but that's really all it would be. People are not going to want to play the older game if they can play a modern version, a modern redone version. And so this is where it comes down to, is it worth it to do? Probably not in general, because even if you have something like Battlestar Galactica where the IP has expired and so Fantasy Flight can't make it anymore, maybe they'll get it again. And if they do get it again, then they can reprint it. And it might be a better version. It might be a better edition that's more fun. Same thing happened with Arkham Horror. Arkham Horror 3rd Edition is a great game. And again, the expansions for that are really tough to get and rather valuable. But they recently came out with Arkham Horror 4th Edition. I personally haven't played it, but I've heard that it's pretty good. So that's the issue with board games as collectibles, is that you never really know whether or not it's going to stop. This is in stark contrast to something like Magic the Gathering. One thing that WotC, Wizards of the Coast, famously did is they have a list of no reprints, or something like that. I don't remember what the actual name is. But it's a list of cards that Wizards of the Coast has promised that they will never, ever, 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 ever remake. And so that means that if you have a 9.5 graded Alpha Black Lotus, that thing is going to be worth tens of thousands of dollars forever. Note I said tens of thousands of dollars. Board games, at most, you're going to be looking at a few hundred. Cards, whether it's Yu-Gi-Oh cards, Magic cards, baseball cards, whatever it happens to be, will go for thousands upon thousands upon thousands, depending on how good they are. And so compared to other types of investments and other actual collectibles, board games 100% are not worth it. Not only do you have the uncertainty of whether or not any game could potentially come back and therefore become relatively worthless as a collectible and as a game itself, but you also have the issue of, look at the ratio of monetary value to physical size. A card being worth tens of thousands of dollars versus a massive board game being worth a few hundred, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't compute well. And so in my personal opinion, board games as investments and as collectibles are only for you as a collector. I personally love the fact that I have a bunch of old Cosmic Encounter games. I don't want to sell them. I did pay a decent amount of money for all of them to get the entirety of them. I even paid extra so that I could get things like the Mayfair edition, which is the first one I started playing, and I got multiple copies of it so that I can have one to display and several to play, and all this kind of thing. But that's me. That's what I want to do. I didn't buy them so that I can resell them, and I didn't buy all the games that I have now so that I can resell them eventually. I didn't know that Shadows over Camelot would become valuable. I had no clue that Battlestar Galactica was going to become valuable, and I don't know if either one is going to stay valuable. So, frankly, it's not worth it. If you want to do collections, if you want to have investable collectibles, do something that you know is not going to come back. Do Magic cards. Even though Magic cards are really weird and I don't understand it. But stay away from board games as something that you can invest in for your future and as something that is likely going to go up in price, in my personal opinion. But, of course, that is far more than enough rambling from me. But either way, I hope that this is interesting for you guys, and I hope that it's something that you all are willing to discuss and talk about, because I'm really, really curious what you have to say, especially with regards to things like I mentioned about Kickstarters. So people buying multiple copies of Kickstarters so that they're able to make money and not only recoup whatever it is that they paid, but maybe make a certain amount back, a certain amount extra on top of it. Or people who kind of gamble and say, I think that this is going to be a great game even though it's, you know, only just coming out or whatever. So for example, relatively recent one, The Adventures of Robin Hood, right? Right now it's out of stock. It's really tough to get. We're having a ton of issues with freight shipping, and so there's a huge secondary market for relatively recent releases that came out at, you know, PAX, Essen, Essen coming up, all this kind of stuff, but Gen Con, all these sort of things, where retailers are going and releasing new games and have a limited stock of them. It's going to be a while before they come back, and so at least for a window they're going to be pretty valuable and you can sell them. But other than that, it's really not worth it. Games are too big. They take up too much space for the value that they create, and on top of that, you never know if they're actually going to retain their value. So let me know what you all think. Do you collect games? Do you try to collect games? Do you care about collecting games? Do you collect anything? I'm curious to see what you guys actually collect for investments, if anything. I personally don't, but if you guys do, share it in the comments, because, you know, it's fun. What is actually worthwhile? Let me know anything and everything. And of course, as always, if you haven't done so already, take a look at my social media pages. You can interact with myself and my channel in a bunch of really fun ways. And with that, again, now it's definitely way too much rambling from me, so I will just sign off and say thank you so much for watching. Hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.